There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and He is bringing it right now into our midst. Good morning. Welcome Life Center. Hope you guys had a great time over there with Ryan and the worship team, and also welcome Living Word Online. Really glad you guys could be joining us as we are beginning a brand new series on identities, discover who you really are. I'll get to that in a moment. Just wanted to let you know that for the first time in many, many years, I went to the York Fair on Friday night. Becky and some family, we went there because we were going to the Brad Paisley concert. That didn't get started until 8 o'clock. And so we decided, hey, let's go at 6 o'clock, because if you're going to go to the York Fair, what else are you going to do there? You're going to eat. Yeah, so I went there just looking for an amazing Caesar salad. I looked everywhere for one. Toward the end of our time there, I'm walking past this one stand and said, oh, I wish I would have seen this first thing. They were selling bacon bombs. Oh, does that sound amazing? A bacon bomb. You can't buy anything at the York Fair that doesn't have the word loaded in front of it. You can't get a potato, you have to get a loaded potato. Loaded fries, loaded chips, loaded nachos. Man, I tell you, even a Caesar salad would be good if it was loaded with a bacon bomb. Anyway. Hey guys, so welcome again. We're going to have 2 months of conversations about something that's really significant. We're going to talk about identity. And the first 2 weeks are going to be a little bit high altitude overview, introduction to what this theme is all about. Today is going to be looking at the power and the promise, the possibilities that are involved in a really sound understanding of who you are. Next week, we're going to look at the pain, the pitfalls, the problems when we don't have this thing called identity figured out. So today and next week, we're going to be high altitude, raising a lot of issues, opening a lot of doors, bringing up some questions, and not necessarily giving all of the answers that you might want, because then in the following 6 weeks, week after week, we're going to be slowly unpacking the most significant things about who you are, what you need to know if you're going to have a very, very strong and healthy identity. I've been thinking about this for quite some time, because identity is really, really big. We read in Ecclesiastes that God has done something pretty striking about us. He's created us, and then He has put this thing called eternity in our hearts. Eternity is inside of us. And as big as that is, there's something even bigger around, because even though we have this thing called eternity inside of us, there's something even greater and wider and better outside of us. We don't even understand what God has done from beginning to the end. Nobody can really fathom that. But there's something really big about who you are, and there's something even bigger about the place in which you live. Walt Whitman was one of the American poets. He wrote a very well-known poem called Song to Myself, kind of a striking and interesting poem. In there, in one place, I think it's like section 52. It's a long poem. He winds up saying that, do I contradict myself? Well, very well, I shall contradict myself, because I'm large. I contain multitudes. Yeah, Whitman was onto something. He might have been really wrong in a lot of other parts of the poem, but there he was really tracking with something. There's something large about who you are. And there are times when we're just trying to make sense out of who we are. It's like, well, who am I? Because it seems like there's multitudes of stuff going on inside of us. It makes it very, very hard to know who we are, because they're so big. Many of you are familiar with the quote from Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of England during World War II. And as things were winding down and they were trying to figure out what to do about this new entity called Russia that was emerging, what Churchill said about Russia, Russia is a puzzle wrapped inside a mystery, inside an enigma. That's how complicated Russia was. Puzzle, mystery, enigma. Hard to figure out. Now, what most people don't know is Churchill went on to quote, but perhaps there is a key. And then in the rest of his speech, he said what he thinks the key is to this puzzle, mystery, enigma called Russia. I so like that I would like to borrow that idea and say, hey, about you, about me, about who we are a puzzle wrapped inside a mystery, inside an enigma. We are really, really complex. We're complex because we're multitudes. We're complex because we're large. We're complex because we're big enough to have eternity in our hearts. But perhaps there is a key to who we are, and we're going to try and explore what that key is. So, identity is big. Identity is also, I'm going to use the word ubiquitous. Man, that's one of my favorite words, ubiquitous. It just means everywhere all the time. If something's ubiquitous, you run into it everywhere all the time. You can't get away from it. And wow, is that ever true of this thing called identity? So many movies, even if we're not aware of it, the core theme of these movies is identity. Here's just like a little bit of a collage of some movies that are all about identity. Some of them are goofy and funny, and some of them are much more serious, but so many movies are just trying to figure out, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? You know, About Schmidt is Jack Nicholson playing Schmidt, Warren Schmidt, who had spent his whole life working and has finally come to retirement. He was not looking forward to retirement, but he does retire. And as he's trying to help his replacements understand all his decades-long work, he's just showing them where all the files are, all the information is. And he retires and he doesn't know who he is anymore because his whole life has been spent working. And he tries to go back to the place of work and to reconnect with what had been so much meaning for him. And there's one episode where he's going back and he sees that they are not only is he no longer there, but they're actually throwing away his decades-long files and just pitching it all in the dumpster. And he's just left wondering, why? Why did I even do this? Who am I? What was it all about? Hidden Figures was a very powerful movie. And by the way, isn't that a powerful sense? Because some people, their identity is so hidden, so minimized in this larger culture that they have to fight to figure out who they are. They have to fight for their identity to be known. Leonardo DiCaprio, catch me if you can. My word, he just changed identities as often as he wants to. He'll be a doctor, he'll be a pilot, he'll be whatever. He just runs from one identity to the next. And people are trying to catch up to him. They're trying to figure out, who are you now? Who are you going to be next? Sometimes I think a few of us are a little bit like that. Catch me if you can as I try out all of these different identities. Everywhere, all the time in movies. And then there's the world of music. Now, by the way, I need to give a little disclaimer. The genre of female contemporary pop stars is not my genre. And yet they're all singing about identity. Has Taylor Swift ever done a song where she's not trying to figure out who she is? Or who her boyfriends are? And Beyonce and Queen Latifah and Jessica J and Pink. I mean, everybody else, they're singing songs about identity because in particular, they're singing songs to a young female audience that they are also fundamentally confused about who they are in the 21st century. And so these songs just stir and resonate inside. Now, I grew up in the rock and roll era of the early 70s, The Who, their song, who are you, who are, I'm not going to sing it for you. It was a stupid song, but we loved it. Who are you? By the way, so Beck and I went to see Brad Paisley. He put on an amazing concert. There's one song that he didn't do. I was pretty sure he wasn't going to do it because he had, to doing that, he had a guest, LL Cool J, who's a really, really good rapper and good actor and stuff. But in the song, the song is called Accidental Racist. Very powerful song. Brad Paisley is trying to figure out his identity as somebody who's born and raised and loves the South. And he says, I'm a white man living in the Southland. I'm proud of where I am from, but not everything we've done. And as the song starts to go on, he and LL Cool J begin to have this sort of like call and response back. Paisley singing something, and LL singing something back, and they're having this conversation dialogue where they're trying to understand, well, here's who I am, and here's who I am, and try to understand who I am, and it's very, very powerful. If you get a chance, go and do a YouTube search, Accidental Racist. But here's some of the lyrics. Paisley singing, "It ain't like you and me can rewrite history. Our generation didn't start this nation. We're still paying for the mistakes of those who did, that a bunch of folks made long before we came." And then here's this powerful line, and he sings it with such pain. "I'm caught between Southern pride and Southern blame." Man, it's ubiquitous. You can't get away from it. It's in the music, it's in the movies, it's in the atmosphere that we breathe. Identity. So it's big, it is ubiquitous, and it's important. There's a whole bunch of big questions associated with identity. Not only who am I, but what am I? What's my very nature? And why am I? What's my purpose? What's my reason? So who I am and what I am and why I am, all those things roll up together in this thing called identity. We've got to figure those things out. Back in the 2nd century, one of the famous early Christian theologians, he wound up making this statement: "The glory of God is human beings, men and women, fully alive." What a profound statement. The glory of God is when the people that he has created are fully alive in the way that they were meant to be. But you'll never be fully alive in the way God wants you to until you know who you are and what you are and why you are. That's why that identity is so, so crucial, so important. And yet it's confusing. So there's a little diagram that I use about a lot of things, and we'll put it up here for you. It's a triangle, and actually in the center of that triangle, you could put almost any question you want, but just for this particular series, I'm putting in the question, who am I? And so as we're asking the question, who am I, there's a couple different places we can go for some answers. One, Christians, the church, for 2,000 years, we have gone through the scriptures, and above all, we want to say, well, what does the Bible have to say about who we are? What does God say to us through the Bible about who we are? Now, at one time, we took the Bible answers much more seriously than we do today. But even when we've primarily focused on the Bible, that was never the only thing, because we also wound up looking to the culture. Well, what's culture saying? What messages are we getting from the culture? And today what I'd like to suggest is the messages from the culture are pretty much usurping and replacing the messages from the Bible, which is why we have so many problems and so much pain, which we'll look at next week. But our culture is telling us all kinds of stuff. Wow, listen, if you think we as adults are struggling with this thing called identity, all you have to do is walk up to the other end of the building where we run middle school on Sunday mornings and we run high school on Sunday evenings, and wow, are they ever dealing with the mess of identity, because their culture is so contradictory and confusing and frankly hurtful on who we are. They have to deal with it week after week after week. And by the way, parents, if you're a parent, you're going to be dealing with questions of identity, not only for yourself, but helping your kids figure out who they are is one of the most painful things our parents have to go through, and one of the most significant. But then there's also this just dynamic of the heart. So when we're asking who am I, we're not asking that out of a context. We're asking that out of our history, out of our story, out of our pain, out of our experiences, out of our narrative as we try to create and craft and discover an identity. So all those things are coming together, and we're trying to pull bits and pieces from all of those things. There's a contemporary musical, Dear Evan Hansen. And the mother winds up asking this question in one of her songs. She says, "Does anyone have a map?" Now, why she asks, "Does anyone have a map?" is because her son has become a stranger to her. She no longer knows who he is or what he is. She doesn't know how to find out who he is anymore. And since her son has become such a stranger and she doesn't know how to re-engage, she's just at a loss. And she says, "Does anybody have a map to help me figure this out?" Well, again, at one time we had a pretty reliable map. It was called the Scriptural Worldview, but that map is pretty much gone. And so now we're relegated to just the mess that our culture has and the mess of our own personal experience. And so one of the things I'd like to suggest, when Winston Churchill said, "Hey, perhaps there is a key," I'd like to say, oh, yes, there is a key, and yes, there is a map, which is why we'd like to just kind of bring some of the scriptural, biblical realities back into our awareness. And so now that leads to the fourth thing about identity. It's big, it is ubiquitous, it is important, but it's also risky. Look, it's a little risky, the conversations we're going to have for the next 2 months. I know that. It's risky. It's risky because it's confusing, but it's also risky because we now live in a time where we pretty much have come to the conclusion nobody's going to butt in or intrude in terms of what I'm going to figure out about myself. It's my right to figure out who I am. Nobody else can intrude. And so it's a little risky when we start to say, well, maybe there are a few things that ought to intrude a bit in terms of your identity. So would you please give us enough space in the time ahead to intrude a little bit into your own wrestling through as you're trying to discover, create, build, find an identity. It's a bit risky. But here's why it's also risky, and I'm very aware of this, is that we have a lot of pain in our stories about identity. Because not only is identity all about who I am, what I am, and why I am, it's also about, am I loved? Really, the question of am I loved, that's an identity question. It's the question of, am I valued? Do I really matter to other people? Do I have any worth to people? It's also asking the question, am I safe? Am I secure? Again, accepted. These are all woven into identity, and we have not always been able to answer those questions very well. In fact, sometimes we have been unable to answer them, and it's risky to raise and stir some of the pain that we have. In 1976, when I was a sophomore in college, a little book started making its rounds through our particular community of Christ followers, and the book was Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? Why am I afraid to tell you who I am? And the answer was very simple. If I tell you who I really am and you don't like who I am, what do I have left? And so therefore, we don't tell people who we really are because they might not love us, they might not value us, they might not accept us, and then we don't know what we're going to do at that point. And so we play games and we present masks and all kinds of things, which, by the way, that's part of what next week is all about. It's risky. And if that wasn't enough, oh my word, if we would have talked about this 5 years ago, it would have been easier. Do you know the mess that we have today with this thing called identity politics and just how angry we get about those things? I mean, it's just hard to talk about it. Pastor Aaron alluded to that last week in his message. And if that weren't enough, the whole issue of sexual identity, it is just like landmines everywhere, just waiting to explode in our faces. This is a really hard series. So it's risky, and please be very patient and give us a little space and grace and let us intrude a little bit into your process. Finally, so it's big, it is ubiquitous, it is important, it is risky, and it is really powerful. Oh, it is so powerful. When you are secure in who you are, when you have an adequate, real sense of worth and esteem and value, then that frees you up, it positions you to now move into very meaningful relationships with other people where you don't have to play games to get them to like you. And it also positions you to begin to move into this thing called mission and purpose. So when I know who I am and what I am, I'm really okay, I'm comfortable in my skin, and I can begin to just seize hold of this life and purpose that I was meant to have. I mean, that's the power of identity. There's a passage I want to read from the Apostle Paul. And in fact, I almost didn't want to read this because I almost had to explain it too much. It's some words that we say, really? Is that so? It's something he says in the letter to the Corinthians, and if you're not familiar with what was going on in that particular ancient city where some churches had been founded, Paul was just one of the people that was making a difference. There were a couple of other leaders, and Paul was not necessarily at the top of the list. So what was going on, it wasn't between the leaders, but it was between the followers, the audiences, that there was a little bit of competition going on. There was a little bit of comparison and a little bit of tribalism going on in that church. And Paul was actually coming out on the short end of some of the comparisons. So that's the context. Listen to this. And remember, this is a pretty healthy guy saying this. It matters very little to me what you think of me, and even less where I rank in popular opinion. Man, I wonder how Paul would do with Facebook likes. I don't think he'd care. Now listen, I need to, before I go on, look, you have to understand, this is not some loner. This is not some narcissist. This is not some social deviant who doesn't care what people think. This is a man of extraordinary love. He's one of the greatest, most passionate lovers of people that you'll ever run across. He loved people so much, he would sacrifice his very skin for their well-being. So this is not a failure of love. What this is, Paul is so secure in who he is that he's okay with people who don't necessarily like him. He goes on. I don't even rank myself. Man, isn't that great when you don't have to go around ranking yourself? You know, and we'll look at this next week. We're just always playing these competitive games. Or where am I in the ranking? Paul says, it doesn't matter to me. Comparisons in these matters are pointless. I'm not aware of anything that would prevent me from being a good God for you, but my own self-analysis, that doesn't really mean much. The only thing that really matters to me is, what does Jesus think about me? Oh, my word, the freedom. Now, again, please don't hear that in some distorted way. This is a person who has profound love for other people and will risk his life for the sake of the people that he loves, and he's really okay if they don't always like him. Man, can you see the freedom that creates? That's the power of identity. It frees you up to love and not have to worry about what people think of you. That's why we're talking about identity for the next 8 weeks. It's big. It's ubiquitous, it's important, it's risky, but it's so powerful. Man, if you can discover who you really are, the truest things about you, then that is going to position you for purpose and meaning and healthy relationships and so much more. Okay, now let me move into then the sort of the back half of this message. There's a model that I want to introduce to you that I got a couple of ideas from a particular author. I didn't really like how the author developed the idea, so I've developed them very, very differently. And so what I'm going to kind of present is my own sort of mix model of the truest things about you and true things about you. But let me just start with the truest things about you. See, this is what Paul is grounded in, the truest things about who he is. And while there's going to be lots of different things that are the truest things about you, and we're going to be introducing you to more and more of them as the weeks go by, the place where I need to start is this thing called the Imago Dei, and I actually put the Latin up there instead of the English because it just sounds really cool, but I also just want it to be a little bit striking for you. I want it to be memorable. It's the image of God. And this is so important, this truest thing about you, that God has extended time talking about it in the very first chapter of the Bible. Let me read to you a few words from Genesis chapter 1. They are pretty extraordinary words. God spoke, "Let us make human beings in our image, make them reflecting our nature." Human beings made in the image of God, reflecting the nature of God. So they can be responsible for the fish in the sea, birds in the air, the cattle, and yes, earth itself, and for every animal that moves on the face of the earth. Somehow being made in the image and likeness of God, there is a sense of responsibility for taking care of this thing called earth itself. So God created human beings. Listen to this phrase. He created them godlike. By the way, that's just another way of in the likeness of God, he created them godlike. From time to time, if you've been around at all, every now and then I'll make this reference to C.S. Lewis and the statement that Lewis makes: if you only could see what you will one day be in the far, far future, when you have moved into your full dignity and destiny and glory, you would see your future self as so full of beauty and glory and majesty that you'll be tempted to fall down and worship your future self as if you were a god. And that's what's in store for all of us: a beauty and dignity beyond our imaginations, because we are made in the likeness of God to reflect the character of God. There's something God-like about us. So reflecting God's nature, he created us male and female. There's something inherently relational about being made in the image of God. And God blessed them. Prosper, reproduce, fill earth, take charge. There's something very powerful about this thing called work and activity and meaningful productivity. I mean, we're just designed to do that. God is a creator. God is a worker. We are meant to do the same. This passage is so loaded, we'll unpack parts of it as we go on. And then he just comes back, just in case you might have forgotten, be responsible for fish in the sea, birds in the air, and every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. And then at the end of the chapter, God just kind of stops and looks around and says, "Oh, this is really good. Oh, this is so very good." This amazing creation, and the pinnacle of creation are you and I, made in the image, the God-likeness That's the truest thing about who you and I are. And we've got to understand and discover and live into what that means. It's your dignity, it is your destiny, and it's your glory. Now, there's going to be a whole lot more of the truest things about you we're going to unpack in the weeks to come. But this is the first one. This is the key we read in Genesis chapter 1. All right, so now let me move to this outer ring. Because while there are the truest things about you, there are also some true things about you, and they're also important. Now, they're not most important, and in fact, they become very problematic if you don't know the truest things. If you take something that's merely true and put it in the center, you're going to actually wind up being in trouble. But when you get the center right, among other things, you're made in the image of God, then there's place for these other things to start to take their orbit. So, for example, there are some true things about you that endure. I mean, they really do endure. It's possible to change them, but only under great duress, with significant difficulty, and perhaps even drastic measures. Let me just give you a couple of examples. Brian Rice. I am white. That's part of my identity. I'm Caucasian. I am English and German ancestry. I'm as Pennsylvania Dutch as they come. Now, maybe if I went and did Ancestry.com, they say, oh, Brian, there's a couple things about you that you never knew. Great, now I know what they are. But that's still now who I am, and it's going to endure who I am until the day that I die. I'm a male. Again, I know gender things are just huge these days. But I'm just saying, I'm white, I'm Caucasian, I'm Anglo-Saxon, I'm male, I'm a native Yorker. Now, by the way, that's okay unless I hate York. Which I don't. I love York. But I'm a native Yorker. I've got a genetic DNA wiring. Look, there's just certain things about me physically that it's kind of who I am. Listen, I was never going to be a basketball player. I just wasn't. And one of the things I really like playing guitar, but unfortunately my fingers are about this much too short. When I'm looking at all the virtuoso guitar players, I'm thinking, how are they doing? I'm looking at their fingers. So their fingers are this long, and mine are this long. And so I'm trying to stretch on the fretboard, and and these guys are stretching from here up to here. It's like, so there's certain kind of genetic DNA things about not only your very body, but also about some personality dynamics. And I know there's room for flux in personality, but listen, there's some things that are just kind of hardwired into us. There's things that endure. And I tell you what happens is sometimes some of those enduring things become most important to us, and we put them right in the center, and they become a real problem. So the Apostle Paul, in a couple of different places, in Galatians and Colossians, he says, listen, you have to understand about these things that endure. Yes, they are important, but they're not most important, because in Christ, when you're in Christ, which is one of those most important, truest things about you, there's no longer Jew or Greek, male or female, slave or free. In another place, he's just saying religious, irreligious, sophisticated, uncouth. I mean, all those sort of categories disappear when you and I are in Jesus Christ, the great equalizer, and that becomes our fundamental identity. So we can never let any of those other things that endure move into the center, but still they're important. We have to understand them, and that's a little bit what Brad Paisley is wrestling with in the song. Look, there's some true things about me, and I have to wrestle with those things. They have some implications. All right, here's another category. There's true things about you that change. They change all the time. Right now they're true, but they might not have been true sometime back, and they might not be true tomorrow. All kinds of possibilities. I'm the lead pastor of Living Word Community Church. That wasn't true back in 2015. At some point in the future, it won't be true because I'll be done with that particular role. But it's true right now. And by the way, so that's where work, occupation, vocation. Those are very, very significant things. But they're in flux. They change. They're in transition. And so therefore, if you put your fundamental identity in those things, and then you no longer have that thing, boy, you are really struggling because you have misplaced that into the center. All kinds of things go in there. Your age, I'm 42. Well, 20 years ago I was 42. Today I'm 62. But you know what? In a couple of months I won't be able to say that any longer because I'll be 63. Boy, what happens when your identity is being in a certain youthful age and you no longer have that? Boy, you got some issues coming. Okay, right now here's another true thing that it's changing, but right now Right now, I'm reasonably healthy and reasonably fit. I haven't always been reasonably healthy and reasonably fit. I am right now, and something might happen in the future that I'm not. All kinds of things happen. Bacon bombs happen. But accidents happen. And cancer happens. And I talked to a person who their whole life had been devoted to physical fitness, and they had a major accident. They could no longer be having the physically fit activity, and they just didn't know who they were anymore. Now, those things are important, but we need to get them in perspective. We're going to help you do that. But next week, when we look at some of the pain and problems of identity, we are loading way too much of our identity on these things that are just in transition. And when they're in transition, are we ever in trouble? Here's another true thing about you. There are some true things about you that they are true, but they really need to be reframed. Let me give you an example. All right, here's where it gets a little risky. Some people can truthfully say, I am a victim of abuse. It's a true thing for them to say that. But does that ever need to be reframed? Because you can't live with that as your truest identity. You can't live that way. There are other things that have happened to us in the past that we have now, we've gotten attached to, and it's gotten attached to us a label of negativity. And yes, it's true, but it's got to be reframed. So if you are, for example, a victim of abuse, that cannot continue to be your identity. You have to at some point have to reframe. I am no longer simply a victim. I am now a survivor, and I am now an overcomer, and I am now a thriver, and I am flourishing. You need to reframe your mentality from being a victim of abuse to being a thriver in spite of the abuse. And you can do that because God is at work on all things to bring good and to advance you. And by the way, in the Romans 8 passage, it's saying God is doing all those things to remake you in the fullness and image and likeness of God. Being an abuse victim is not what it means to be in the likeness of God. God's going to do something about that. He's going to reframe your identity. That's so powerful. And here's the last thing. There are some true things about us. They're just bad, and they really have to be changed. And in the devotional that you'll pick up for this week and on the website, we're going to have blogs day after day. We're going to help you dive into these a whole lot more. So just one example so you know what I mean. Some of you sitting right here can actually, and probably need to say, today I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. That's a true statement about who you are. It's a statement about a bad thing. And so at some point, that needs to change, and you need to not say, I am an alcoholic. You need to say, I am an alcoholic in recovery. And I am an alcoholic who's been in recovery for a year, and I'm an alcoholic who's been recovering for 10 years, and I am a perpetual in recovery alcoholic by the grace of God until the day that I die. That is a bad thing that simply needs to be changed, and by the grace of God who makes all things new, it can. And that's, again, one of the other truest things about you. God is changing everything. But more on that to come. Ecclesiastes is right. There's eternity inside of you. Whitman's right. You're large. There's multitudes. Churchill is right. You are a puzzle, a mystery, an enigma. But there is a key. And we're going to help you discover that key and that map in the weeks to come.